You know, when I teased Internet Explorer for Unix at the end of my Solaris 7 video, I knew I was going to get a reaction. After all, the mind boggles at such a strange sight that one can only hope for a logical explanation on why such a thing exists. I thought much the same in 2012 when I had a brief opportunity to play with IE for Unix via X11 forwarding, which is how I made this cursed screenshot. Now, 9 years later, I have finally taken the time to dig in, explore, and explain this truly cursed piece of software. Now, I could have just left you all hanging, but you know, I've learned that people like watching me suffer, so let's just rip off the band-aid and dive right in. For anyone who's familiar with Microsoft of the 90s, it seems like Internet for Unix is something that just really shouldn't exist. In fact, I spent hours following trails of breadcrumbs in an effort to ultimately piece this mystery together. As always, this is your host NCommander, and today we're going to take a strange trip down a very weird and windy road. Now, I could start with the dry history, but given I flashed the goods so to speak, let's take a break from tradition and just start with the trials and tribulations relating to the installation. Now, if you watched my Solaris 7 video, it would seem like this would be a relatively simple task, right? Well, no, it's not. For that 10-second clip, I ended up spending the better part of the day looking for system patches and then debugging multiple failures. It all starts innocently enough with the installer, which mostly wants to know if you want to make Internet Explorer your default web browser and if you want to install Outlook Express. In keeping with the pain and suffering theme, I of course said yes here. This was, of course, the point where it all started going downhill. Trying to launch IE via the iExplorer command simply errors out complaining that system patches are missing. That isn't entirely surprising since Solaris applications have runtime patch dependencies. That being said, installing updates on Solaris is, well, it's an experience. That's the best way I can describe it. System updates are distributed as both individual patches and in large bundles known as patch clusters. These are roughly equivalent to Microsoft hotfixes and service packs respectively. To actually perform the update, the system needs to be shut down to single user mode, after which the install cluster command can be used. This begins a very slow process in which patchadd attempts to install each part of the cluster. During this process, you'll get cryptic error messages relating to errors 2 and 8, which is really just patchadd's way of saying that a patch is either already installed or it's simply not needed. After nearly an hour of waiting, we're finally ready to reboot and try this again. With a fully patched system, one might hope that our problems would just magically go away, right? Well, no. iExplorer now complains that our patches are too new, and then promptly core dumps. Then, just to add insult to injury, the system kernel panicked. And yes, those two things did in fact happen back to back. It's at this point that I realized that we are on an express bus to hell. Still, I wasn't giving up here. By checking the IE host platform log, we can find the exact patch number and revision that IE for Unix seems to require. Furthermore, in the user local Microsoft directory, I found this script called mwcheckplatform, which appears to do a more comprehensive system check. It specifically shows which patches are certified for use and even includes a description of what they do. By sheer dumb luck, I was able to find an archive of almost all the published Solaris 7 patches, including the exact revisions wanted by IE for Unix. Finally, progress. Sorta. As it turns out, I couldn't easily just downgrade a few patches. Instead, I needed to do yet another clean install, and then only install the patches listed in the check script. After all that, we finally get something new. I don't think I've ever been more excited to see a license agreement screen in my life. That, my good folks, is what defines winning when dealing with this sort of project. We can now take a closer look at what IE for Unix actually is. Comparing Internet Explorer 5 for Windows side by side, they look almost identical. Digging deeper begins to show that this does appear to be a complete port of Internet Explorer, albeit with some Unix-specific changes. For example, Microsoft appears to have split the difference between Vi and Emacs users as for selecting default editors. I'm not sure that this was a real solution to the editor wars, but I suppose it's to Microsoft's credit that an attempt was made. Now, I'd love to tell you how IE for Unix performs, especially in comparison to the Windows version, but, well, there's a problem with that. The ugly truth is that it's not exactly easy to evaluate an early 2000s web browser in 2021 since the web as a whole has moved on, and very little will work as is. I am actually amazed that Microsoft.com renders at all. NetHack.org is one of the very few sites that I know that will render properly. In fact, I was even able to download files, which brought up a dialog box that I have not seen in many years. From what I can tell, IE for Unix seems relatively fast and responsive, especially compared to Netscape, but there are some hiccups here and there. For one, neither FTP nor Gopher support appears to be present. While Gopher is excusable, a lack of FTP feels very unusual for the time period. Furthermore, both of these work just fine in the Windows version. I couldn't find any mention of these features in the help or README files, so I'm not certain if they're supposed to be present or not. That being said, for the use of Tenox's web rendering proxy, it is, at least to an extent, possible to use IE for Unix on the modern internet. The web rendering proxy works by converting web pages to image maps, so this isn't a perfect simulation, but we can get some idea what the browser was like to use in its heyday. However, the thing I'm most interested in has nothing to do with web browsing in 2021. Instead, it has everything to do with 2001 and those pesky IE-only websites. Throughout the 90s, both Microsoft and the Netscape Communication Corporation would fight for dominance in what would become the first browser war. In an effort to stack the deck in their favor, Microsoft created proprietary alternatives to the then existing web standards. This practice, which would later be called Embrace, Extend, Extinguish, led to certain sites that were simply incompatible with anything besides Internet Explorer. To help illustrate what I'm talking about, let's look at a simple time and date demo on Windows. This demo uses one of those alternatives, specifically VBScript, and as one might expect, it fails miserably when loaded in Netscape. In fact, this demo seems Windows specific since it also happens to fail on Internet Explorer for Macintosh. The million-dollar question thus becomes, will this VBScript demo work in IE for Unix? I'll give you a moment to write your guesses below, and with that, let's get a drum roll, please. It works! Let's be honest, that probably wasn't the result that most of you were expecting, right? It was this and other seemingly platform-specific behavior that made me start taking a closer look at just what was going on behind the scenes. From what I can tell looking at the documentation, nearly all IE-specific behaviors are present in the Unix version. It's even supported by the Internet Explorer Administration Kit. The only major exception appears to be ActiveX controls, since those are inherently tied to the processor's architecture. There were supposedly plans to provide a Unix variant of ActiveX, but I am not certain if the necessary SDKs ever saw the light of day. We can find more clues if we start digging around in the other part of this bundle, Outlook Express. In truth, any sane human would have run like the dickens, but since it's me, let's dive in feet first. Upon starting OExpress, we're immediately thrown to a screen that should look highly familiar to any internet user of the late 90s, the Internet Connection Wizard. This isn't a one-to-one copy, however, since a few screens in, there's a unique checkbox to use Solaris's built-in mail spool support instead of an external mail server. This is a feature unique to Outlook Express for Unix since Windows has no concept of local mail. Not long after, we're thrown in the main screen of Outlook Express. We're also greeted with 2 introductory emails that automatically are generated for new accounts, showing off its tendency to create HTML emails. I spent a fair bit of time comparing this to the Windows version, and just like Internet Explorer, it seems to be pretty much the same. One of the few exceptions I found was a large number of Unix-only mail clients listed in the Import Mail Wizard, which I thought was a neat touch. Now, I could just kill 9 Outlook here and be done with it, but well, I probably should use it for reading real mail and news, right? Right, let's get to it. Getting this to work required a fresh Ubuntu VM to work as an intermediary, complete with getmail, postfix, and quite a few other odds and ends. I document the process more in depth, but honestly, even I have a limit on how much abuse I am willing to inflict on my viewers. Just trust me when I say it wasn't easy. The end result is that I could send myself a genuine email sent by Outlook Express for Solaris. Yay? I guess. Well, it at least proves that Outlook Express can be connected to Gmail, and it's already given me inspiration for a new time-limited Patreon perk. So if you want to get your own authentic, written by Outlook Express for Unix email, check the link in the description. Before I can escape this horror show though, there is one other thing I should do. Besides being a fairly mediocre mail client, Outlook Express also supports news groups. So, of course, I should take it onto Usenet. If, by happenstance, anyone subscribed to comp.mess, you might have found a post that I made on July 22nd, 2021, and it might have been made with Outlook Express for Unix. I'm not crazy enough to confirm that I actually did this, but if I did, then I can rest easy knowing that I fully explored everything Outlook Express has to offer. That said, let me take a moment to cleanse these unholy abominations from my body and soul before we move on. That's better. I think that covers the penny tour of Internet Explorer 5 for Unix, but I find myself having more questions than not. I assume a lot of those watching do as well, so let's loop back around and answer the how and why. For anyone who's familiar with Microsoft's history, the idea of them having anything to do with Unix in the 90s seems ludicrous at best. However, as I would learn, this onion had layers, so to understand the how and why, well, we're going to have to peel it. As I already noted, IE for Unix seems much closer to the Windows version than one might expect. In fact, if we take a closer look in the user local Microsoft directory, we can see a large collection of files. If we look a bit closer, some of these file names might look familiar. In fact, they seem to look a lot like the files that you would find in the System32 directory of any contemporary version of Windows. If you find yourself thinking something along the lines of, "This sounds a lot like wine or winelib," then have yourself a cookie. Simply put, Internet Explorer for Unix was made by porting core Windows libraries to run on top of Unix, and no, I am not making that up. This crime against the natural order also wasn't done by Microsoft. It was done by a company with an annoyingly similar name called Mainsoft. If you've heard of them, it was likely due to a small incident in 2004 where they were indirectly responsible for one of the most famous source code leaks in history. Now, it's said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, so let's wind this back to the beginning. In the years following the IBM-Microsoft divorce of the early 90s, Microsoft would involve itself in quite a few ventures, many of which seem odd without context. One of these were the Windows Integrated Source Environments, or WISE kits. Under the WISE program, Microsoft would license the source code to Windows to independent companies for a variety of purposes. The best known product created with WISE was probably Insignia's Soft Windows, which was a full PC emulator for Macintosh and Unix platforms. Insignia used WISE to allow deeper integration between Windows and the host operating system. This is where Mainsoft enters the picture. At least as early as 1993, Mainsoft was offering a special SDK to help ease porting Windows applications to many of the Unixes of the era. From what I can tell, Mainsoft was primarily a consulting firm specializing in building compatibility solutions. The earliest versions of their website have the tagline of Microsoft Technologies on Unix only reinforce this belief. Those same archives are also where I found information on their visual MainWin product, which appears to be a contender for one of the worst product names I have ever heard. Word names aside, it appears Mainsoft's products acted as a set of plugins for Visual Studio combined with modified and recompiled versions of the core Windows libraries and headers. This provided a one-stop solution for easily migrating code from Windows to Unix. According to the release notes, product announcements, and case studies, Mainsoft appears to not only offer the Win32 API, but a whole host of Microsoft technologies such as MFC, COM, and more. Mainsoft appeared to support a large number of major Unix variants, but what really surprised me was the fact that they even offered MainWin for Linux. We can even see Linux as a target in this screenshot of the visual MainWin product. In fact, a few of the check scripts shipping in IE for Unix explicitly see if they're running on a Linux host or not, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if IE for Linux was something that might have existed internally at Microsoft or Mainsoft at one point. Unfortunately, besides quoting old sales material, there isn't a lot I can say about visual MainWin. Without the product in hand, so to speak, it's hard to tell just how easy it was to port code from Windows to Unix or, well, do anything besides speculate. Sadly, given how niche it is, it's likely that visual MainWin will never properly be archived, but on the very offhand chance that anyone has it, please get in touch. I'd love to take a look at it and also help to get it properly preserved. That being said, we can at least content ourselves by looking at these photos of visual SourceSafe for Unix and knowing that some ancient horrors are truly gone and forgotten. Or well, that's what I want to say. While recording this segment, I actually managed to find an evaluation copy of VSS for Unix. I can't help but feel like I should apologize to society as a whole since this was probably something better left forgotten. For those who don't know, Visual SourceSafe was a source control management system made by Microsoft, and well, the word bad doesn't do it justice. Thankfully, there's a license protection check, so unless I spend a stupid amount of time with Ghidra or another reverse engineering tool, it's safely inert. Or at least as inert as hazardous material storage gets. That being said, in my brief examination, I found some interesting bits and pieces that I could dig into. That, however, would be for another video, and we're getting off topic. Stepping back, none of these investigations have answered the broader question of why does Internet Explorer for Unix exist? The closest I found to a mission statement are a handful of quotes supposedly made by the then Executive Vice President of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, in May of 1996. Ballmer states that Microsoft wanted to compete with Netscape, which at the time dominated 85% of the market. The article also notes that not having a Unix version of Internet Explorer was proving a problem for OEM adoption, but it doesn't elaborate further. Those of you who are paying close attention will note that I used the term supposedly with that last statement. It's because I couldn't verify that this article actually exists. The article, which claims to be from InfoWeek Electric, only exists in the form of a mailing list archive, and some of the wording in it seems suspect to me. I wouldn't have even brought it up if it wasn't the only mention of a rationale for IE on Unix that I was able to find. I do recommend that you all come join me in the comments section for a bit of theory crafting since, unfortunately, I can't provide definitive answers on this one. It's on that note though that if you enjoyed this video, please give a like and consider subscribing. If you really enjoyed this video, consider hitting that bell or becoming a Patreon. I've recently been working with an editor to help improve my videos, and Patreon pledges go a long way in that regard. Also, let me know in the comments if you want me to dig deeper into the topic of the Weiss kits. Such a video would be much more abstract in my current fare, but it might be an interesting dive. With that said, as always, you can follow my adventures in real time on Twitter or come hang out on Discord. Until next time, this is your host NCommander, signing out and wishing you all a pleasant day.